This is one of the most unusual knitting videos you're ever likely to see. It's by and about the folks who run a most unusual enterprise called the Philosopher's Wool Company. From their farm in the lush countryside of Tiverton and Inverhuron in southern Ontario, Canada, proprietors Ann and Eugene Bourgeois oversee each detail in the production of their quality wool products, all the way from sheep to sweaters. In a few minutes, Ann will give you the same complete instruction she's given to knitters in fairs and exhibitions all over North America. Instruction in a simple and gratifying knitting technique she and Eugene call the original Philosopher's two-handed ferrule. But first, if you were to drop by the farm, and you're more than welcome, you'd probably think you'd landed in some place located between the 18th century and today. The average visitor usually comes with one thing in mind. They've heard about the wools and wool products in the Philosopher's home-based store. So let's step right inside and get a peek at the spectacular sweaters you'll be able to knit with the help of this video. Ann Bourgeois designs the patterns and colorways of Philosopher's wool sweaters, often inspired by her morning constitutional.
Every morning, Scruff, our dog, and I set off for our walk and planning session. I'm planning, he's walking. He's a real influence in our lives because every morning he expects me to put on my running shoes and go out there and see what's doing. Sometimes it's a blue heron that takes off as we cross the creek. Sometimes it's the cardinals and the blue jays, or the porcupines up in the trees nibbling the fresh leaves. But the walk definitely influences what I do when I get home. I'm planning the colorways, the designs. Sometimes it's one, sometimes the other. But when I get home, I can pick up my needles and knit one of the sweaters you're going to see.
Ann and Eugene Bourgeois are not only knitters and sweater designers, they also raise sheep, oversee the cleaning, the dyeing, and the spinning of Philosopher's wools, and sell their wools, sweater kits, and sweaters right across North America.
We've got the rose heather and okay, you do, all right. Yep, just that. Exactly what this costs.
Behind the store is a warehouse where Eugene keeps his fleece, and the fleece he buys from other shepherds across the continent. He cleans the fleece in a mill which avoids the use of chemicals. These chemicals often destroy the fibers and make naturally soft wool itchy. Likewise, he spins and dyes his wools in factories which respect the quality of his fine product. For a while, like most sheep raisers, Eugene was just content to sell his fleece to market. He and Ann liked to card and spin and dye some of their own wool for personal use, but that was about as far as it went. Until one day when Eugene saw the value in value added.
One day I brought my wool to Toronto to sell it, and then afterwards went to a yarn shop to buy yarn for Ann to knit. She was busy spinning our own wool at home, so we knew how nice it was. But it takes so long to spin enough wool to make a sweater that I thought I'd really surprise her when I got home. Well, it was me that was surprised. I spent $22 a pound for this yarn, and that was on sale. And I just got my wool check that day, 30 cents a pound. 30 cents a pound they gave me for my wool. And I thought, well, this is not right. There has got to be something that we can do to get a better price for our wool. And that was when the idea of Philosopher's wool really took hold.
This ram is about as relaxed as you can get in the hands of the experienced shearer, John. Now, John is just one of the many sheep raisers Eugene and Ann have met in their travels. These days, the Bourgeois spend half the year touring North America, setting up new markets for their yarn. And as they travel, Eugene meets shepherds who get what he feels is next to nothing for their fleece from the wool market. It seems to him that low payments to raisers just encourages the production of low-quality wool that keeps alive the myth of a scratchy, irritable fiber. It really makes him wonder.
Isn't there a way that we can buy their wool and pay them a premium, a serious premium, for producing this fine fiber. So wherever we found that we could sell our yarn, we have tried to set up a network where we can buy wool from local producers and have that wool processed, and we try and process it even as locally as possible, so that those producers have an outlet for their product. And wherever we've been successful in doing that, in selling our yarns, we've also been successful in finding good producers who want to participate. People often wonder why our wool doesn't scratch and itch, and you don't have to look very deeply to find out. If you just happen to have some fleece and look at it like this, and handle it, you see how much of the lanolin is in this wool. Just that one brief little touch of it puts all this lanolin back into your hands, and that protects the wool, and that protects the fiber from scratching and picking.
When Philosopher's wool cleans its wool, it uses a process that keeps as much of the lanolins as possible. That's why Philosopher's wool yarns and sweaters are so soft. But enough of the wool business. Time for some inspiration. Let's see some of the Philosopher's wool sweaters you can knit at home using the two-handed Fair Isle technique, and we'll teach you in a few minutes. now, here's Ann Bourgeois.
All of our sweaters are knit using a fair isle technique. It doesn't matter which way you do it, but if you put one color in each hand and use our two-handed fair isle technique, you'll find that knitting these is incredibly easy. There are never more than two colors in a row, and we've got two hands. So it works. The work is facing you, you can see your pattern, and the circular needle means you never have to stop. People ask us where we get our colors from, and really it's a mixture of things. There's first of all the incredible palette of 28 colors that Eugene has developed. They come from the 5 different mills across the country, and the real difference is that we're using a lot of heathered wool, so that you get these delicious blends of color. But talking of delicious, we also invested in a brand new barbecue, because we could barbecue the brighter colors that we like to occasionally throw into your kits, or you can choose to throw in if you want to. So here is barbecued purple, green and red, done on the barbecue outside. And since we started playing with that, and we were now into the food region, we took out some soft drink mix. And in this kit I'm going to work with, here is orange Kool-Aid. It looks in a sweater as though the light has just caught the edges of the flowers or the point tips of the diamonds, or put in a sprinkling of color. You'll see later some totally Kool-Aided sweaters, and they look very different.
Right now, here's Eugene to show you how to dye wool with boiling water and crystal drink mix.
We take this package of Kool-Aid, rip open the top, dump it in, don't stir. Take the skein of wool, dump it in, push it down. We'll wait a minute, then we take spoons, lift the skein out and turn it over. And wait another minute. This time we want to get a very pastel-y shade of Kool-Aid orange, and this is just about perfection.
Now, we've speeded up the process for the sake of this video, but you get the idea. Open up the skein and hang it out to dry in the sun.
So let me show you what we do the fair isle with. We use a circular needle, sometimes a short cable for a sleeve like this, sometimes longer. These are nickel-plated, smooth as silk. Everything's going to be knit in a tube so that you never have to purl. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. Let me show you on a teaching piece how this works. The first thing that I like to do is to put one color on one side of my lap and the other there. That wool is never going to tangle with this method. I've got one color in one hand. Maybe you're used to using your right hand, maybe you're a left-handed European knitter. I've wound the wool on my fingers so that there's tension holding the needles. If you have that tension, this method becomes incredibly easy. I'm going to start off by showing you how to make one stitch with either hand. That way, those of you who are right-handed have to learn how to knit with your left hand. Those of you who are left-handed have equally got to learn how to knit with your right hand. The right hand's often called British or American, the left hand often European or German. Not totally accurate, any of those terms, but this is going to be how it goes. I'm going to start with a right-handed stitch. You've got 4 different stitches to learn. Here's the first one. A right-handed stitch is made by inserting the needle into the first stitch, taking the wool behind and hooking it through. Let me do that again for those of you who are learning this way. I go into the stitch, around the back, and bring my first stitch through. I've made 2 stitches with my right hand. I can go on like this, but I don't want to have any floats. The method we're using shows a totally woven fabric in the back, and it's comfortable, nothing to catch your fingers in, and so easy to do. So that was your right-handed stitch. Now, remember, you've got tension in the yarn. Let's just go over how we picked it up. I know you know how to hold your right-hand one if you're an American knitter, but your left-hand one, you're going to poke your finger towards yourself, turn your hand, and put that finger under, so that the needles are now supported by the fingers. Left-hand stitch, second stitch. You go in, just as you did before, and there are two ways of doing this. You can either knit with your left finger, making the stitch in exactly the same way as you did your right-handed stitch, and bring it through, or you can do it as the Europeans do so incredibly fast, where they tip their needle over the wool and hook it through. Let me show you that again. Into the stitch, needle tip over the yarn, and hook it through. Now, this is time for you to practice. You're now at a position where you can knit one stitch with your right hand, one stitch with your left hand, one with your right, one with your left. On a graph, you're just knitting an XO, XO, XO pattern. Here it's red, blue, and it's time for you to do a little practicing before I teach you steps 3 and 4. I hope you enjoyed that. You may have come across the fact that your finger wanted to wander away from the needle. I knit with my finger on the needle, but if yours has crept out like that, you can still knit with your left hand. You may need to use another finger to help get the stitch through, like so. I can't knit with my finger out there, as you can see, but here we go. There, and that finger helps it through. You'll find that either your middle finger or your left index finger or your right index finger are going to help push those left-hand stitches that you're not used to through at first. After a while, you'll find your own rhythm and your own way of doing it. So you've done one of each color. Now let's try for the third stitch. The third stitch is used when you have a pattern that calls for more than 2 stitches in your right hand. You're now doing, instead of XO, XO, you're going X, 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 O. And the X is your red, or my red. So here we go. The first X will be a perfectly normal right-handed stitch. The next one you want to weave, and this number 3 stitch is you're weaving with your right hand. You go into the stitch and under the yarn that's on your left index finger. So you've gone under 2 layers of wool, knit the stitch, hold the left wool tight, and bring the right-hand stitch through. You've in fact lifted the left-hand colour over the right. Go back again and an ordinary right. They need to be alternate. Stitch 1 and stitch 3, stitch 1 and stitch 3. So here's a woven one and an ordinary one. A woven one and an ordinary one. And what I'd like you to practice now is X, 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 O. So here we go. Stitch 1, first X, second X, third X, and 1 with your left hand. Time for you to practice again and discover how delightfully easy that is. In fact, we have 2 sweater designs that just use these 3 stitches. So when you've practiced this, you can start right away on a Philosopher's Fair aisle. Let me show you the last stage that you need. Don't try this till you've seen it through a couple of times or you'll mess yourself up. You're going to pretend to knit with your right hand, pretend to knit with your left hand, unpretend your right hand, and bring the stitch through. Now, let's do that once more. We'll put an ordinary one in between, or it won't be woven, into the stitch. Pretend to knit with your right, going through the needles, through the intersection the same way. Pretend to knit with your left. Take out the first one and bring the stitch through. I should mention here, if by any chance you're finding your stitches are twisted on the needle, you've been bringing it through the wrong way. It's important that it comes through the way that you've seen my fingers doing it, so that with the left hand, when you bring it through, your needle is over the yarn, and for the woven one, round with the right, pretend through in the same direction, like follow my leader, take out the first one and bring the stitch through. Now you could knit a pattern, and some of us have, where you've got 11 stitches with your right and 4 with your left, 11 with your right and 5 with your left. It doesn't matter what the pattern is now, you've got the 4 stitches to do it. How about you try this practice one again? Let me just remind you, hook a left hand one and then into the stitch. Pretend, pretend, unpretend, and through. Why don't you pause your machine and practice? I'd like to show you how to change color too. We've been working with red and blue. I'm 6 stitches away from my row marker. Instead of continuing right up to it, I introduce the new color, Kool-Aid orange. I lay it over the right hand yarn, hold it, knit 1 stitch. It's now locked into my work, and it continues in the hand that I'm not knitting with. I'm knitting red, so it's with the blue. I knit 1 stitch under, 1 stitch over. I now want to knit 3 blue stitches. I move the orange to the right hand, knit 1 stitch woven with the 2 strands, another stitch normally, and move over the marker. I'm now going to weave out the red and knit with the orange. So move the red to my left hand, 1 stitch with the orange, 1 woven under both, 1 ordinary, and 3 blue is what my pattern calls for now. Move the red back to my right hand, knit 1 blue, pretend, pretend, take it out and through. A little tug on it removes that bar at the bottom, and an ordinary blue stitch. I can now cut off the red and continue with the orange. Let me show you here a piece of work where you can see the row marker was down this line. Here are the wools being woven in, here are the colors being woven out. Finishing your sweater is as simple as snipping off the stitches, leaving a little fringe inside. Nothing to weave at the end, no ends to darn in. It's done. You've woven them in as you went.
And we'll be back with tips on finishing a sweater. But first, let's go out to the wool shed and see 3 more Philosopher patterns.
I've shown you our technique of two-handed fair isle, and now I'd like to show you how we finish these sweaters. The finish is what makes a beautiful garment to wear. It's not that I knit so much, but we have 30 ladies who bring me 200 or 300 sweaters a year, and each of them has to be of the kind of quality that would win a first prize at a fall fair. So there are different ways to do each of these parts that I'm going to show you, but this way is a simple way if you don't have your own particular method. All of our sweaters start with the sleeve. A lot of people say I don't, but we do, for 3 very good reasons. First of all, you need to find out if you're on the right size needle and your tension is correct to make a garment that fits you, or whoever you're going to give it to. Otherwise, there's no point in continuing the exercise. So you're going to start by knitting the sleeve. And the sleeve starts with the cuff. Cuffs can be knit on 4 needles, or equally they can be knit flat, because when you're knitting a multicolored cuff, whether it's a sandwich of color like this, or random stripes, or just has one stripe, you have those color ends, and they can be used to sew the cuff together into a circle. It's much easier to work back and forth flat in the knit, purl. You can't weave in the ends as you go, or it distorts the ribbing. So here's the cuff as you'll have knit it, and here it is when you've sewn it together. There's the join actually, and increased for the sleeve and changed to a larger size needle. So here I am, I've knit the cuff, and I'm about 2 inches up the sleeve. I'm not going to really check my tension accurately yet. You don't want it so stiff that it's going to be a rigid sweater. You don't want it so loose that you can poke your finger through, dishcloth loose. You want it to feel comfortable and approximately the tension that's suggested in the pattern. This feels good, and I'm ready to continue. I've just finished a row, and I've come to my row marker, and instead of having 1 loop in it, it has 4 loops. Top 1, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, because in this pattern I'm increasing at the beginning and end of every 4th row. So I just pulled it off my needle because I'd finished the 1st row, I move it over there. If I'd come to it on the 4th row, I move it over to there, I'm in the 4th row, I know it's an increase row, I increase by pulling up the stitch from the row below. Sorry, knit the extra stitch, knit the next stitch. When I come to the end of the row, that 4th hole will tell me that I was on an increase row. No one can lose it or move it for you. Here's a finished sleeve to show you what I mean by the wedge. The straight tube would go up there, but the wedge here increases, maintaining the pattern by increasing a stitch at the beginning and end of every increase row. While you do that, you maintain the pattern that you have got in front of you. Look at the graph and see how that's done. In a children's sleeve like this, there isn't actually much increase. In your adult sleeve, you'd increase till further up here. I said you were starting the sleeve with the sleeve for 3 reasons. First reason was to check your tension. A flat tension swatch is useless in circular knitting because you've purled back instead of knitting back. In the round, you're knitting all the time. Your tension's different in the purl. You need the sleeve for your tension swatch. But you're starting the sleeve not just because it's a tension swatch, but also to ensure that you can get a sweater out of your Philosopher's kit. There's enough wool in your kit to make a sweater, 2.5, 2 3/4 pounds or more, and the sweater doesn't weigh more than that. You do your 2 sleeves first so that they will match. You'll have enough red to match your 2nd sleeve to your 1st. If you ran out of red in the body when you're knitting it, you can substitute another color. Your body does not have to match your sleeve. Equally, as you're learning your colorways, because this is called Color Your Own, as you're learning your colorway, well, you weren't quite happy perhaps with this, or the zigzag in here, you wanted another color. Change it in the body. The body doesn't have to match the sleeve, and you can improve on your color work from sleeve to body. So you've now finished your sleeve. You've got to the top of it. Actually, you've left it on the needle. This is finished and ready to sew in, but when you've finished your work and you haven't done the body yet, leave it on a needle because you may want to take out a few rows or add a few rows for the correct fit. But you've finished your sleeve. You can now check that your tension is absolutely perfect, and this is perhaps the most important thing that you're going to do in making the sweater. So you take your tape measure. You're going to measure 20 inches of work. You're going to measure 4 inches in one spot, 4 inches in another, 4 and a third, a fourth and a fifth. You've measured 5 times 4 inches, 20 inches total. You now know how many stitches you have in 20 inches. Take that number and divide the total by 20 to give you how many stitches you're knitting in 1 inch. It won't be an exact number, it'll be with a decimal. Use a calculator. Now think of the person you're knitting the sweater for. Remember to knit the sweater big enough, at least 10 inches bigger than their chest measurement. At least 10 inches for a lady, maybe 8 inches for a man. Depends on whether they want a close fit or not. Let's say you're knitting a 48-inch sweater. 48 inches times 48 times the number of stitches you had in 1 inch is the number of stitches you want to use after your ribbing in the body of your sweater. Go to the closest pattern size, the closest number. Don't worry what it's called. Small, medium, large, doesn't matter. It'll give you the right size finish. And then your sweater's going to fit the person you want it to. You've made 2 tubes, 2 sleeves. Now the 3rd tube is your body. And I'm going to show you how you can make as easily a cardigan as a pullover, because many people want to wear cardigans but don't want to purl back and forth. And with a tube, no purling. Your tube is in the round. You do your ribbing in the round. When you come to the patterned part, you're going to make an extra purl stitch or a purl stitch that fits the pattern up the middle of your work. There it is, 1 purl stitch all the way. Take 1/4 of your stitches, knit across 1/4 of the stitches, starting on the sides so your color changes are still at the sides. Knit 1/4 of your stitches and make a purl stitch. Put yourself a marker to remind yourself if you want, and continue around with that purl stitch in your work to mark the center front of your cardigan. You continue around until you come to the pockets. Some of you perhaps don't know how to put in a pocket. Let me show you with a piece here that is just at the pockets. I've made 2 pockets, the right number of stitches across, the right depth, so that it rests on the ribbing. The ribbing supports your pocket and the pocket doesn't sag. I've come to the pocket and I'm going to put the stitches, same number of stitches that are in the pocket from the work, are on a piece of thread, and I can knit the pocket now into the garment. There we go. I knit across these stitches until the pocket has become a part of my work. Here's the one that's already been put in. You can see the pocket and the flap on a holder. I continue past the pockets and I continue knitting up the sweater until I come to the right length that you have got, the width of your sleeve plus 1 inch before the shoulders. So here's your sleeve width and an extra inch, and you're going to put in purl stitches on either side so that you can knit around and later cut that open to put the sleeves in. I said the horrible word cut. You're going to cut it so that you can knit all the way and no purl, except for those 3 purl stitches, 1 up the front and 1 at each side to mark the sleeve openings. And here is your finished 3rd tube. It's been set up with the pockets, it's got the purl stitches, and I've actually knit right up past the neck. You don't need to do this. You can purl back and forth at the neck if you want to. I prefer to mark my shoulders, mark 3 inches, 2.5 or 3 inches depth for the neck opening, or trace around a favorite neck of a sweater. And that will be sewn, as I'm going to show you the sewing on the other pieces, and the neck picked up. I'm ready to cast off the shoulders. The smoothest, strongest shoulders are cast off together. I've turned the work inside out. I'm going to put the 2 needles together of the 2 shoulders. I'm going to go through the first 2 stitches together, and with a piece of yarn in the same color, I've knit 1 stitch through the next 2 stitches on both, 1 stitch on each needle, a 2nd stitch, and cast off through another pair and cast off the 2nd stitch, just as you regularly cast off, except that you're knitting the 2 together. Beautiful firm edge. Here's the cast off edge. Isn't it beautiful? Now, earlier I used the word cut. Before you cut, you need to find a sewing machine and reinforce those purl stitches so that when you do cut, you know that the stitching will hold. Knitting doesn't want to unravel sideways. You haven't got a problem really, but this will not only reinforce, it will give you courage. You're going to take your sewing machine and make 2 straight rows as close to the purl stitch guide. The purl is only a guide, and it's only here if you're making a cardigan. If you're doing a pullover, you haven't got a purl stitch there. Make 2 fine rows on either side of the purl stitch, making sure you catch the top and bottom stitches. At the sleeve opening, exactly the same thing, except that you need to continue in a U under your purl stitches so it doesn't ravel down the side of the body. I mentioned earlier the neck. Again, 2 rows. The second one is just insurance. If you have a modern machine, the stretch stitch or a zigzag may help you. I'm going to show you now how to set in the sleeve. You want your sleeve to set in so that it's absolutely straight across the shoulder. I've cut open my sleeve opening, taken my sleeve, and I've marked the top edge and the bottom where the stitches spiral up the inside. So many people ask us, why doesn't it match exactly under the arm? It doesn't match so that you'll know which end is the bottom of your sleeve. You're going to put it against the body, and you're going to T-pin the work together. I'm sewing this in using what some people call a mattress stitch. I've started at the bottom front of the sleeve so that if there's any fudging, it's going to be at the back bottom and will never show. Your underarms really don't show. I've sewn in the first 2 stitches. The cast-off edge of the sleeve is a continuous line of chain stitch. I come from the far side, that being the far side, across and up the next 2 what I call bar stitches. They're in this first clear row, clear of the sewing stitches. I'm sewing this together with orange so you can see what I'm doing. First clear row, I'm going up 2 stitches, up 2 bars, the bar behind the V of the stitch, up 2, across to the far side, back through the next one, 2 more stitches of the bars, across. I keep changing hands. It's like shoelaces. Up 2. There's my join. When I pull, it vanishes completely to a fine line of running stitches, and you can see the smooth edge. Here it's completely sewn in, invisibly, because it was using a jade stitch. So the sleeves are sewn in. Next, you're going to pick up the neck ribbing. Machine stitch here, pick up on the far side, again, where possible, picking up bars, pick up the right number of stitches around, back and forth, knit purl, until you've finished your neck. You're trimmed, ready to do your button bands. I like to show you a button band swatch. You're going to pick up every single row going up the edge of your sewing. And because you're picking up every single stitch, it's going to be a slightly different tension, probably, to that you used in your ribbing. You can measure the tension in your ribbing, count the number of rows, and see if this needle was right. Most likely you need to go to a smaller needle than you used in the ribbing at the base of the sweater. Try a smaller needle. Save time and knit 21 stitches, or 25, whatever, a small swatch here, back and forth. Cast it off. Check what needle you need to cast off to make a perfectly flat band. It isn't sagging, it isn't puckering. When you do this, you don't want to have a pucker. If you have, you're going to have a loose band, and that band will droop and not look very well finished. When you're checking this out, do a buttonhole. I cast off 2 stitches and cast on 2 in the next row going back. Simple buttonhole, but it works. you've done a swatch, you know what size needle you're using, take off the swatch and start to pick up the button band, which is exactly what I've done here at the top of the sweater. I'm going to pick up the bar stitch again in the right row and knit into it. The first row is knit so that you'll have a neat join of your band and your sweater. Pick up the next bar stitch. Remember, it's every row of Fair Isle you're picking up a bar stitch. Pick up the next one, and each time knitting it until you get to the bottom of the band, and you're going to go back and forth to knit the completed buttonhole and button bands, done the same way on either side of the purl stitch, on the outside of the stitching, so the stitching is in here, and my goodness, we're there. We've got 2 bands, we've trimmed it at the top to make a continuation of the neckline, trimmed it at the bottom, sewn on the buttons. Let it lie around for a while. You're done. You've made a cardigan. When you have the courage, however you get that courage, all you need to do is cut this open. Down the middle here, I like to work from the inside so I can see the purl stitch, and I'm going to cut right through and show you the finished cardigan. Well, I'm going to go now. I'm going to turn it inside out first of all. It's much easier to work from the inside. Here's your beautiful knitted fabric. Here are my sharp scissors, and I'm ready to cut it. I'm going to start at the bottom, and here we go. Lovely noise. It's going to take me a little while, and in a minute I'll be able to show you the finished sweater. Few more stitches to go, right up the middle of the purl stitch, the top, there we go. Now I can show you the finished sweater. Put it back in the right way, and voila, we've done it. Inside, a nice clean edge. If necessary, you can trim away the odd bits of yarn that may be sticking out. Button it up. And Peter has a nice new sweater. Sometimes it just happens that the sweater you finish isn't exactly what you wanted, in spite of all your precautions. There's a few easy things you can do, especially with Philosopher's wool. The first one is wash it or damp it. It is going to grow slightly on the first wetting. So if you wanted this sweater to be wider, you would wet it and block it that way, lay it out to dry pinned. If you wanted it longer, you would wet it and pull it that way and pin it. And you can get, on an adult sweater, 3 or 4 inches extra, either in the width or the length, or 2 inches width and 2 inches length. It's roughly a square that you're making. That's worth knowing if the sweater ends up a little snug. Instead of putting it away in a dark corner, just wet it and block it. Wool has a wonderful memory and will stay where you put it until you wash it again. However, here's Peter's sweater, and Peter's grown and it doesn't fit him anymore. What do? Pick up at the bottom of the sweater one side of every stitch in the top row above the ribbing. Snip in the row below 1 stitch after you've got all the stitches on a circular needle right the way around, like this, half of each stitch. Snip in the row below, take off the ribbing, knit some more Fair Isle or put on a longer ribbing. Either way you can lengthen the sweater. In the same way you could shorten it. You could pick it up here, cut this away and put the ribbing on. That's how to lengthen and shorten if washing doesn't work. The other thing you may want to do is put pockets in it with exactly the same technique. Decide where the pockets are going, pick up the top band of the pocket, half of each stitch across here, until you've got enough on to make a proper sized pocket. Takes a little while, even on a children's sweater. Here we go. Then you're going to take another needle, miss one row, and pick up one row apart. So there's a clear row in between the two pickups. And in a minute, you will have the means to make what we like to call a retrofit pocket. You didn't think you wanted pockets there in the first place. You forgot to put them in, whatever the circumstances. You've now got the wherewithal to put in a retrofit pocket. I've got my 2 needles with stitches on, bit narrow maybe you want to make it wider. Snip the middle stitch. Go in and pick up that middle stitch. Snip it. Unravel those 2 little pieces. And you can knit up the band, knit down the pocket, sew it down, put in a matching one over here. That's a retrofit pocket. Equally, I could turn this sweater into a cardigan. I would machine up the middle of the sweater, 1 stitch apart or 3 stitches apart, depends on the motif, whether it's got a center point of 1, 2, or 3 stitches. Machine neatly like you were taught with the purl stitch. Pick up your bands, cut it open. That's actually how I made my favorite sweater. It's right behind me. It was a pullover, made for a competition in a hurry, so it was a pullover because it's faster. I picked up bands up the middle, and it's been a cardigan that I've worn for 4 or 5 years.
Congratulations. You've learned the original Philosopher's 2-handed Fair Isle technique, and it's time to knit your own sweater. What color should you choose? Well, perhaps it's time for some more inspiration. Should you choose to knit a Philosopher's wool sweater, Ann and Eugene will be pleased to make up a custom kit with the pattern and color combination of your choice. And you'll find all the materials and instructions you'll need inside the package. If you run into trouble, the folks at Philosopher's will be glad to help you over the phone during office hours any day of the week. Evening comes to Philosopher's wool. Granddaughter Jenna and son-in-law Tom set off to do some evening chores. Besides sheep to feed and a vegetable garden to weed, there are other critters looking for dinner. Jenna has some lettuce for the rabbits, while Tom lays out some feed for the chickens. And then Jenna collects the day's offerings from the ladies. Out on the lawn, daughter Stephanie and son Alex do some high stepping to a beat only they can hear. Jenna's finished chores, and she's caught up with Peter, a family friend, playing in the orchard. And Ann and Eugene are off to see the sunset over Lake Huron. We'll join them in a moment. Well, as you've just seen, anyone who likes to knit can knit a Philosopher's wool sweater. And anyone can wear one.